So we're gonna do pop-up manager to do this, and then on the next video we're gonna go over player XP and how to do that. And this applies to whether you're doing VR or not. And I'm gonna dive deeper into it. But I wanted to show you what it looks like right now, and then we can talk more about it. It's been a while since I've done videos, and that's because I've been sick and busy at the same time. And so I've done the bare minimum, and it's been really hard. So let me show. I have this pop-up. It's super simple right now. Been improved on it, but it follows me wherever I go. And in this case scenario, we're starting and say, "Hey, welcome to the game. Are you ready to play?" And giving him the option. Maybe what I'm gonna do is, maybe do you want to go through the tutorial, or do you? And so then you can do like a hover over. We have, I don't know if you guys seen this, but we have a new model that's just a temporary thing. And then we have the level with the experience and the health bar that we used. We still have the, the gesture. Let me show you those right now. The enemy spawns when I get out. I think we seen this in another video. And I have the pop-up that shows me that I leveled up. And close it when I do. And I can see here that I'm level 1, and I have 7 out of 12 for the next level up. These guys give me the same amount of XP every time. So that way I can level up. Oh, and then I died, so then I came back. And these guys keep attacking regardless. The idea is going to be that we can. This thing is OP, but they have enough health, so we'll change that. Okay, so you get the idea. Is you have this pop-up that you interact with, and I have different options. And the idea with this is that I can make it red for debugging when there's errors. I can use the same pop-up and have the error display and have the player just be able to take a screenshot and then close it down when they're done with it. Activate, but for some reason, let's look at it. So dive in. Pop-up. Camera. Follower. Here's the canvas. Close window. I like to have the here. Look, so there's a trigger. This trigger box, the layer UI. We have a UI interactor and a finished event. And I think this finished event is what's causing problem. Let's go in. So going on is that trigger enter. If the event trigger, we return. So this is so that it doesn't do it multiple times, especially when you're in VR, this will trigger a lot. And then it will invoke this. And what happens is when this is invoked, it will say, hey, it finished the event. So event trigger should be false, and that's where the problem is. So this is a great opportunity to show you how I debug. Because I've seen a lot of people on Discord always are like, oh, I'm stuck. I can't figure this out and I need help. They write 100 lines of code and then they expect someone else to read it and understand. Like, no one is, it's really hard for someone to read code and understand the scope of what it's doing in your game. So the more you dive into your game, the less likely that someone's going to find your error by just looking at the code. And this is what determines. Let me close. This is what really sets you apart as a programmer, is debugging your own stuff. Okay, so let's go back in. You saw me doing it. The main thing is following the logic. You have to go step by step and not assume anything. As you saw me, I said, okay, we have the trigger, the box is in the right, and sometimes we do miss certain check marks. That's where experience comes in. The more you do this, the more you will realize where things get hung up. As you saw me, I checked the box, I checked the layer, the UI. The trigger event, I'll show you how this works because we are going to dive into it. But I wanted to show you, let's first, before we move on, let's make sure it does work. Okay, so what was happening is that this was getting set to true, and it was getting set to true here, but it was supposed to trigger it back to false so that this event could be carried. So what was going on is this was getting triggered and this played, but it just stopped working. And so let's go and do it now, and it'll work. So every time you debug something and you think you fixed it, you go back and try it. So we're gonna try it again. we have to level up, because the problem is when I level up multiple times, see how this one is a different, and we'll go over the pop-up. So I'll show you how I have it set up, but let's level up. So, oh my gosh, I kept missing. Okay, level 1, see, it came back up. Where's there? If you stay in an area, they'll come after a certain amount of time. Leveled up, they'll probably close again. So I fixed that too. I think it's gonna come. Oh, come on. Oh, they're supposed to be like level 1. Yeah. Okay, time for the. Oh my god. Oh my god. No matter how OP I am, I still can't kill him. This is bad. I just gotta stop moving. So now, actually, that fixed that problem. Because as you saw before, these things weren't. Gotta fix this targeting. Okay, did I level up? So I have 38 out of 48. I think one more dude. And I'm gonna do start drawing up. Um. Okay. Oh, that guy's gonna keep. Anyways, we're done. We fixed it. So when I went to edit the recording to make sure everything's good, I realized that while I was playing, I hit the mic a couple times, and it made it so that the sound was off and some parts were missing. When I do VR videos, I'll make sure to do different parts so that way I can record the play session without interfering with the mic. And oftentimes when I talk, I move a lot, and so I tend to face away from the mic. So I'll work on that. But for simplicity's sakes, I'm just not going to record myself in this part, and I'm going to try to be brief and help you understand where I'm at. And if you have questions, definitely put in the comments. I really want to help people finish games. That's my focus, is helping you finish your games. And so what I'm showing you is things that I'm implementing that I know will impact the game, and trying to get to that place where I can play testers and actually have a playable game. So instead of having things in a vacuum and in an empty scene, I want to show you the process. So not just teaching you about the UI system, but also when I add it and how it transforms. So you'll see these things evolve with time and improve. But for now, I'm just trying to get things in a prototype phase so that I can do a vertical slice and really polish these. So I'm adding a little bit of things here. As you saw, the UI is animated. We're going to go over that. This guy I'm working on is, I was testing AI modeling. So this is the AI model, stretching it. We'll do another video on AI. I'll probably link it below, but there is already someone that went through it and showed how to do it from beginning to end and add it to Unreal. You can watch that video. I was just trying it to test it to see how it would do with my setup. And I think it's really well for things that don't have cloth. But even if the model doesn't turn out, it's good for white boxing, right? I didn't have to pay anyone, and it's really fast. The first thing I want to show you is the UI, how it interacts. I have these box colliders, and this is specifically for VR. So if you're not a VR developer, you can skip this part, this section of the video, and go to the next. But first, we're going to talk about how the UI interacts. If you're not doing VR, what you would probably do is trigger it with a menu button, or as the game progresses, it's probably a click, right? You click or you tap on the screen wherever you want to close the UI and stuff. And so it's super simple because it's usually just clicks, no trigger events. But for VR, it's like a lot of people are like, well, how do I do UI? Most of the time in VR, people do ray casting. Even the Unity examples do ray casting. But I feel like that's it's actually harder to do the raycast, and not necessarily harder. It's just I don't think it's very intuitive. Also, this is simpler. For the sake of time, I just did a trigger box. If you watch my previous videos on in-app purchases or buttons, I do have buttons in this game, and that's why you see these other. I had other buttons in here before this left box. So this is actually not a trigger; it's a collision. So I do where you actually physically push a button, and so you could do that too. I want to be as simple as it can be, and so there's no physics. It's just on trigger enter. The one thing you want to make sure you do, I've seen quite a few times when people are having problems with triggers in Unity, is due to layers usually, or if it's kinematic or not. On trigger, you have to make sure it's kinematic. You want collision, just don't use this and that, and it'll do collision. If you want to do physics for like pushing buttons down, you do collisions. If you want to do on trigger enter, you do kinematics. If you want to do a specific hit point, like find out where something's been hit, you would do collision, because then you can grab the point of where something hit. You also have to take into account, I do simple shapes, not just for performance, but they interact a lot nicer. Even sphere, sometimes it's a little bit different than on trigger. But then if you do custom mesh to the finger, there's no necessity to do super precise. Okay, so that's the first thing. We have this UI finger script. And the reason why I have the rigid body on the finger is because I don't want a rigid body on every button. I just prefer to have, because I'm going to need to know which finger is pressing the button, because what I'm going to do eventually is I'm going to put the controller here. I'm going to add haptics to the change line here. You'll see that I have it on both controllers. I can set the intensity and the duration. Hour long. Yeah, so shot for. So that's what I would do for here as well. I would do a haptic feedback on a specific controller for the right and the left. And that way, every time you touch something, you're getting feedback. The trigger is super simple. All it does is trigger enter, you have a UI interaction. It means it's UI. I want to trigger the event. As you can see, I was also debugging it to make sure it was interacting with the right things. And then we'll go into this interactions. This is in the canvas. So if I go back to this pop-up, you can see that everything's closed window and this responses. Well, these responses have colliders, same with the X. As you can see, the same layer is trigger, and I don't need a rigid body. You only need the rigid body on the script that's actually detecting the on trigger enter. This doesn't have any trigger enter. As we saw here, all it does is it triggers the event. And as you saw me earlier debugging it was this one thing made all the difference. Okay, so we have the interactions, and it's super modular, because then I can say, okay, this button will hide the game mode, and then this button will actually send the reply back. And I'll show how this works next. We're gonna go, so now we're gonna talk more about the pop-up manager. I like to call it pop-up manager. I think in here, yeah, I call it pop-up manager. You can call it whatever you want. You can have it in 2D games. You probably don't need to have it in the player. You will probably have it as an overlay, but because of the way we interact with the player, I just have it there in VR. Just want it in front of the camera. We might do different things based on feedback from players. We might put multiple pop-ups and we'll have them be grabbable so you can organize them maybe. But maybe you won't have them pop up in front of you unless it really is a desperate message. Okay, so the way we have it, grab the pop-up, it'll create the message and animate it open, and it won't close it. It'll just leave it there. And so then you have the close button. That's why you have this close button activated, because now you can use that button to turn it off. The next thing is display message, but with a countdown. If you add a hint for countdown, it will shut it down after a countdown. And this is the one that I usually use, because usually you don't want to bother the player constantly. So you will notice that in here, I have different numbers for depending on what's going on. If I want to make sure the player reads it, I set it for longer, especially with purchases. Purchasing items and currency, you want to make sure the player has enough time to read what's going on. Then the other one is the yes/no response. We have an action, and so we turn on the response and we say, okay, we're going to wait for this response. Well, yeah, so we're going to wait for this response. We're going to store it for now. When the player decides to answer, then the pop-up will close and we'll send that response down the line. Okay, now you only have one because I was testing this. So I have this game progress manager that will say, hey, welcome to the game. You saw this at the start. And then on the response received, if it's accepted, it'll invoke that response. And here, before we even start, we assign specific functions to be called depending on the answer. So here's the answer. So, and you can see it's just a tab. But the idea is that we want to be able to reuse this response without having to write multiple code. I'm trying to modularize, that's even a word, things so that things are more compact, because it is going to get crazy. And I'm going to have to save the state. So the idea with this is that as you progress through the game, we can add more than just pop-ups. We can actually interact with the player and find out what he wants to do, or he or she wants to do in the game. As they level up, they might not want to go through the tutorial, they might skip stuff, um, and then they're left on their own, right? But if they want to come back and say, "Oh, I really want to go through the tutorial," okay, then they can go in the settings and either go back or continue through the progress. So that's something that we can do. But as you see, the pop-up manager has these display messages with the different parameters that we can do. And then the animation is actually pretty straightforward. The one thing that ChatGPT didn't catch is that you can't divide by 0, so you want to make sure you never put this 0. What I usually do with ChatGPT is I try to give him things that I know it can do well, as long as there's very specific parameters. And I know, so I usually write like a blank script saying, okay, this is what I need work. I need this to happen with these parameters. And ChatGPT will do a good job at doing that. And then what I do is I test it. Could it be done better? You definitely do. I care. Right now I don't. So I'm trying to save time with ChatGPT. So what I do is I try to give him tasks that I don't want to do. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to take time. And since it's working, I haven't had to touch it. It's pretty straightforward. Not much to it. We have the game objects. Um, it's not the only way to do this. This is just one way. And my advice is to not let decisions of how to do certain things paralyze you from getting the work done. I'm someone that is not completely pro, you could say, but I do have experience, and I have experience. Feel like in the right field, which is making things work and getting them out the door. So publishing games and finishing them. And that has helped me realize, like, in the big scope of things, it doesn't matter how good or bad you are at coding. The main thing matters is your habits of working. Like, that's why I'm very adamant about helping people finish. And this is one of those, the pop-up manager. In the next video, we'll go over leveling up, the XP, and more specifically with our game and how that's working out using the event channels. I previously talked about these event channels, and it's been really good for doing all kinds of stuff that I wouldn't be able to do, and it could get really messy without these. So we'll talk about more leveling up, XP system, the stuff that people really like with RPGs and stuff. Then we can really move on and start the progression system and start working on a vertical slice for the game.